This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Late Late Show. I'm your host, Paul Hazzard. Tonight, I'm speaking with Trey Holland, PSI School Director in Kiev. Let's get to it.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Trey, the last time you and I spoke, it was just around about curfew time in Kiev. Tell us a little bit about curfew then.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that the society learns that the witching hour is around 11 o'clock. And that last hour, if you're out, if you've gone to a restaurant or you're with friends, to start making your way home. And all the little details of life in a modern city, where there's Ubers or taxis or trains, they all have evolved to respond to that reality. For example, if you're going to get an Uber, you better get one by 9 o'clock, because the Uber has to not only get you home, they have to get home as well.
Yeah.
Sort of things like that, but it's there in the background. There's curfew. Of course, we can talk about the situation with the air alerts and how that's starting to become more clear to me, the different factors and impacts that has just on day-to-day life, and definitely with the students as well. The curfew, it was initiated at the very start of the conflict. And it was to make sure, I believe, when their security concerns included the possibility there might be, shall we say, malignant agents and in the city, so they could clear the streets. And if you were out after a certain point, they would treat you as someone who was up to no good. And the curfew has continued to stay in place. What is interesting in association with the curfew, when I first arrived, there was more of a blackout type of approach at that time. And before the winter, they started to keep lights on more of the time. But now, which we can talk about, the strikes are definitely increasing in frequency. And as we go into the winter, the blackouts are going to probably recommence at night as well.
Trey, we'll talk about the strikes in a minute, but as I sit here in Northern Ireland listening to you, I might take a holiday in Paris or Rome. There's a part of me thinks you're describing Kiev as if it's Paris or Rome or Belfast. You talk about going out to a restaurant. How is this possible in a war zone?
It's incredible. It is shot. It's counterintuitive, right? The idea that a country at war, a city, a capital, a city of a country at war, would be able to maintain some semblance of normalcy. And when I first, at times, not all the time, but I think it's a determined statement by the society as a whole to maintain as much of normal life as they can as a form of resistance. I've talked to a number of Ukrainians about that, and they feel like one of the greatest things they can do to show their resilience and make a statement against their attackers is to carry on to the best of their ability. So they see it as a personal and a collective statement. There are functioning restaurants, there are bars, there are parks. And I remember when I first arrived, I couldn't believe it. The first time there was an air siren, I saw people not really responding. It was during the day. And people were walking their dogs. And I'm like, where am I?
Right.
But like I said, it depends on the type of strike. There was a record number of drones and missiles that came in 2 Saturdays ago. And a lot of people, a lot of Ukrainians came in the next day to school, and some were shaken by the experience. It was an all-night deal. The attack started at 2, and they continued until 8 in the morning. And then we didn't go into school that next day, but we did on Monday, and we were able to get together and talk about it. But I think it depends on the severity of the strikes themselves.
Are those strikes scary? Because in our tech run, you told me you had recorded some of them, and the sound, the sound was what struck you.
Yes, it's for a little context. You and I spoke about my last job. I worked in a garbage dump school. It was called Safe Passage in Guatemala City, and I was there for a number of years as director. And
Yeah.
I want to counterface. I think it'd be good for your listeners to kind of think about, you know, what security, what risk might be like in various environments, right? So in that garbage dump zone, it was a gang area, and there was a
Hmm.
great number of shootings. There was a lot of violence and personal violence in the home, and what I would want to say about it is very intimate, incredibly intimate, in the sense you're in a small community and these things are happening daily, and it affects families, and you're
Hmm.
talking to them as they come to the school. Um, Going to Ukraine, it's vastly different. It's much more anonymous, the violence and the sound, and it's got a surreal nature to it. When
Hmm.
you look up in the sky and you see this fireworks like effect, and you see the tracer bullets, and you catch yourself saying things like, "Wow, tracer bullets look different in the movies." Which I know is a ridiculous thing to point out, but these are the type of questions that start to kind of run through your head. But being aware of it and being cognizant of it is a different experience for me. And I want you to forgive me because I don't have the proper words to articulate it quite yet. I'm processing that too, along with many of us. But it's just a different, more holistic risk. And
Hmm.
actually, the second thing I'd say is that it's constant. Even if there's not a strike, even if there's no sirens, it's always around the corner in your mind, and
Okay.
it definitely affects your day to day, like behavior and the way that you approach life and all those things too.
You're you're very buoyant. You clearly have a very strong personality. You're very resilient. You clearly take your leadership role very seriously, and you carry a lot of responsibility for others and your school, your teachers, and your pupils. And we'll look at the detail of that in a minute. But how frightening is it being there, Trey?
I worry about my students and I worry about my teachers. I feel very safe, interestingly.
Hmm.
Um, and I really don't want to reduce it to something as basic as probabilities, right? Um, but the chances of being struck. I talk to members of the embassies and their security teams, and they talk about this a good bit, and they'll say things like, "Well, we had this many car wrecks in Kyiv last year, and this many people, fatalities were suffered from airstrikes, and the car wrecks are larger actually." But I feel that there's something missing from that statement, and I'm trying to get my head around it myself. Yeah, the math makes sense to say I'm in more danger driving a car than being in my apartment. But there's a
Hmm.
psychological piece, there's an emotional piece that's left out of that dry equation. I think there's something else going on. So your question's it's a very profound one, and I want to be very clear. I look in the mirror every day, and I have no illusions. There's no faux bravery. I don't see myself in that way. I'm going to be very transparent and open with you. In my past, I feel I tend to operate well in the moment, but I need, like anyone would, time to kind of shake off the aggregate. The the thing in Kiev, though, it is kind of constant,
Hmm.
especially now. I want to add one more part to this. When I arrived in the spring, we were kind of lulled, I think, into a bit of a false sense of complacency, in that the
Hmm.
strikes were not as numerous. The weather was beautiful. We were starting the school, the exuberance that comes with opening the doors. We still have a lot of that in many ways,
Hmm.
but the days are shorter, it's colder, and people are starting to think about last winter when the strikes were
Hmm.
so severe that they knocked out the power. And so it's changing. And so, as a leader, my response to that is changing as well. Um, but I do feel like taking time, I think all of us do, and I pretty much require it of my staff, to take care of themselves. And part of that is being able to leave and get away from not only the job for a little bit, but also the stresses that come with that arena, for sure.
there was a point when the school was set up in Budapest, but you have since returned to Kiev, isn't that right?
Actually, it was Warsaw. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was Warsaw.
Oh, Warsaw, yeah.
My predecessor, Rachel Caldwell, an amazing director in her own right, I had been with PSI for 5 years at that point. And she stewarded the relocation of the school from Kyiv at the beginning of the full-scale invasion. She stewarded that process of moving the school to Warsaw. And at that time, the school broke into pieces, frankly. The school became essentially the equivalent of a displaced person. A large number of the students left the school and went to other countries. Some of them stayed online learning. Again, all the tactics and tools we acquired during COVID were put to good use again. And so we had a component of the community that went to Warsaw, and another part of the community stayed in Kyiv. The Ukrainian families, because men are not allowed to leave the country. And so each of the families, the Ukrainian families, had very hard choices to make regarding whether they could go or not. And some of the families even split up, where the father stayed and the wife and children left. So we had all kinds of experiences during that time. But I took the job a year ago, October, and I took the position formally on July this last year. But I've been working very closely with Rachel in the preceding months. I've been in board meetings. I've been getting to know staff members. And so the transition was I believe, quite seamless. And she was such a great partner. And I think the two of us together in this almost symbiotic way carry two parts of the story, the leaving and the return.
Yes, I've been in contact with Rachel, and hopefully I think she's going to be a guest on the show at some stage in the future. We really look forward to that.
Yeah, you'll love that. She's amazing. So, Rachel, hope you heard that.
I'll turn the volume up on that a little bit.
Very good.
Yeah.
The wonders of modern tech.
Exactly. So, Trey, you've given us a story of a school that has been agile, has been responsive. War is declared. Rachel moves the school out to Warsaw. You came along. You've moved the school back. So it's a very flexible, very agile. It's not just as simple as that, of course. And you've also kind of told us about, the semblance of normality and how that's very much a statement of the people, of resistance and defiance. But you also talk about, the air raids, the tracer bullets going over. I think you recorded the sound or you videoed them, and I know that's terrifying. So your students must find this frightening. And I mean, it is a kind of a rite of passage that you can go to school without being stressed, if I remember, I think even didn't Shakespeare write about it? The whining schoolboy with his satchel, the shining morning face, creeping like the snail, unwilling or unwillingly to school or something. My English teacher would rap my knuckles for not remembering that correctly. But how you've told me how you manage. You've told me how some of the local people manage. How do your pupils? They're children. They're becoming adults. How do they get to school? How do they manage? How do they ever focus and concentrate?
These are all key questions, aren't they? I mean, the school opens. Okay, so that as a premise, as a concept, we can celebrate that. But the success of the school is completely founded upon our ability to do exactly what you're describing. And I there's a balance. And we're learning to strike it, I think, better each day as a staff and a team and a board, frankly, and a community, which is to create the conditions in an environment that is really uplifting, supportive, safe. I believe in my heart, and I hear this from our families and our parents particularly, that their kids feel safe with us. And I mean that emotionally as much as I mean physically. So there's the part of wanting to create a haven, if you will, but at the same time, I talk to the staff about this as well. We have to name it. We have to name the reality in which we reside, because to not do so I think it would imply that we're trying to isolate ourselves from existence. And I don't think that would be helpful for the question that you're raising, which is
Yeah.
how do we support the kids in their experience, right? And so
Yeah.
we're looking at different ways to do that. I want to talk about trauma for a brief moment. Yeah, just so we repeat this, like the internet was so bad because we do experience that from time to time, and I am no expert in this, and I don't have any insider information, but there's general understanding that there's jamming can happen, and if we find that when the internet is rough, we tend to get sirens not long after that. So if there's a correlation there,
Yeah.
possibly. But
Yeah.
yeah, the internet was terrible that night, but I'm glad we can pick this back up. I really appreciate it.
And I should
The
say you're in Washington now, isn't that right? You're in
I, I,
Washington. Yeah.
I am. I'm at the NEAS conference in Washington, D.C., and it's been fantastic being here since yesterday. Um, I miss Kyiv. I miss the team very much. It's hard not to
Right.
be there at the same time because you want to be there to be part of the solution. But being here and sharing the story, talking to people have been phenomenal. So interested and passionate about the school and what we're doing there, and people are very interested, which is always an inspiring thing for me personally. But yes, I'm in
Yeah.
DC at the
Yeah.
moment. Um, yeah, this my background is primarily either in trauma and best practices in that area, or special need or learning differences. Those are the two areas
Yeah.
that I'm passionate about. But trauma in this environment or any environment, I would include the school that I was at before in Guatemala. It can impact kids in very different ways. And part of the role I feel like I want to bring to the table is supporting the staff and building their capacity as trauma informed specialists themselves. And what does that mean? It means being able to have a patient assessment model for dealing with students, because stress, anxiety, PTSD related just behaviors in general, they are so different in so many different ways. It can manifest as latent aggression. It can manifest as jumpiness. Kids can be triggered more easily. Um, and it can also result in silence and kind of almost a
Yeah.
robotic kind of withdrawal.
Yeah.
And the teachers that we have are phenomenal in the sense that they've come to Kyiv well positioned to be realistic about what they are facing there in terms of the students. But they also need to be reminded that if they're seeing stuff in the classroom that seems out of sorts, um, it's not that we explain everything we see in the class or in the school. Oh, that's anxiety, but we have to have it in
Mm.
our tool. We have to have it in our toolkit. We have to, as part of the holistic whole student, understanding. And
Mhm.
the other part of trauma informed practices is self care, and this is a big one with our staff, because secondary
Mhm.
stress is a thing. The longer
Yeah.
you work in those environments, so we work on those two things mainly.
So you talked about, physically and emotionally. So you have a shelter, haven't you? And
Yeah, we do.
occasionally you have to really run to the shelter, isn't that right?
Yeah, we have a 5 minute goal to get the
Yeah.
entire school into the shelter. The reason 5 minutes, because that's the fastest something can
Yeah.
reach Kyiv after we receive an alert. That would be a hypersonic missile. And so our target and goal was to just train the school, train the faculty, train the students to get to the shelters within that 5 minute window. And I'm really, really proud to say that we invariably are successful in that. And
Yeah.
the thing about the shelters, but even before I arrived, it was so important to pick up the work for the previous leadership team of looking at the shelters as learning spaces.
Yeah.
Safety comes first, of course, but
Mhm.
there's so many important reasons for doing that. And I, I want to say I wish you could visit, but I mean, maybe one day you will, and you can see these.
Mhm.
But they are set up like classes. The teachers know to continue the work that they were doing in the class. That is important academically, because there's so many deleterious consequences of having learning disrupted with these error alerts.
Yeah.
We're never going to optimize in the shelter and equate everything we can do in our regular classrooms. But I feel really
Mhm.
strongly that anything we can do to ameliorate those negative consequences of constant disruption of classroom is number
Yeah.
one. But two, I believe, and I think it's been borne out by experience, it's got a psychological benefit as well. If the learning continues in the shelter, it's making a statement to the students, right? That there's continuity. And I think it helps them, back to your earlier question of the students and how they respond to all of this. Each student is their own human being, their own experience, their own response. And we just have to keep that in mind as well as we go to the shelter. We have a psychologist on standby in the shelter. We have our student support coordinator, our whole school principal, and myself are very, very strongly embedded in the experience down in the shelter. Just being present, moving through the classrooms, keeping levity in place where possible. It really makes a big difference for the kids. The challenge we're facing now, though, Paul, is that the strikes or at least the air alerts are every day now. It wasn't like that a couple months ago. And you add that to the weather and all the things I mentioned before, just keeping an eye on just the general welfare of the students and just the mood. And those of us who, like yourself, that work with students for a living, you get kind of that sixth sense about
Of course.
your students. And so we use that, and we've got the support mechanisms in place. We've got the policies that work, just how we inform the parents that we're in the shelter. And just as a last little bit here, I'm very proud of our shelter. It's a safe space. I love our building. It's got good bones. I think that, again, relatively speaking, all things considered, it's one of the safer spaces to be in that part of the city, which is it's great comfort when we're down there.
Yeah, big comfort and vital. And I'm really getting a very strong sense of how, against all odds, you have a really titanic struggle, but you're succeeding in this titanic struggle to make things as normal or as usual as possible for students and staff. And I think that's got to be very, very important.
It is. You nailed it. Exactly.
And I like that you talked about, sorry, Trey, I'm talking over you.
No, please, go ahead.
But I like that you talked about, the levity. And I think, maintaining that perspective, is very important as well. But Trey, I hear another tactic in the shelter is you play the guitar.
Oh my God. I am not a guitarist. I'm a percussionist by trade. But the thing about it, I have a very high tolerance level for embarrassment between us as friends. So that for future reference. And I noodle around with the guitar. I play some chords and stuff. So I brought it down, and the last, I think a couple weeks ago, I brought it down, and we were playing. It had a couple students playing as well.
Very good.
That's hilarious that you know that.
Well, a high tolerance for embarrassment is a very good quality in a teacher. It's essential, isn't it?
Very much so.
I was also listening.
The kid.
Yeah, so listening. When you're talking about, your 5 minutes to 5 minutes to the shelter. My mental picture, I don't know if you've seen this film. My mental picture is Kindergarten Cop. Arnold Schwarzenegger, and when they do the timing and he gets all the wee kindergartners out and they're all marching.
Yes.
So Trey, in my mind's eye, you are Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, without the muscles, I can assure you. That's hilarious. I hadn't thought about that movie in forever. Yeah, we've got the shelter is split off into different sections, and like our secondary school is in one part, and we have our EC and our first grade and second grade in another section as well. And that's another part. Like a lot more work to do on this front, but my gosh, I want to get some more toys in there, more color. We've got good mats and stuff for the kids because we have to convert these spaces because when we're not under air alert, we're using parts of our basement area, which is we're so fortunate to have. So those spaces had to get converted from, a changing room, for instance, over into a space for first graders, for example. And so we've got everything kind of ready to go, and the teachers are amazing, just absolutely amazing, coming down and getting the mats down, keeping the kids calm. We've installed a projector in the kindergarten area. So we're constantly improving those spaces. We've
Yeah.
we've actually improved the ventilation system in our secondary area. We've got some monitors down there for CO2 and humidity and that sort of thing, just to do whatever we can. Strangely enough, I'm sure this won't shock you, but if we can increase the comfort in the area, that also has a nice psychosocial benefit. Because if people are
Absolutely.
if they're uncomfortable, then it can add to their sense of distress.
So I think, Trey, you mentioned a very interesting term the last day, doing a lot of soul searching.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's also a reflective space down there,
Mm.
and I think the type of teachers we have, which both returning and new teachers together, they bring this just comprehensive sense of calmness, empathy.
Mm.
And this is how they teach. This is what we model, obviously, in our school.
Hmm.
And it's so important to us. Well, the teachers employ that. And by building this culture of discussion and sharing, um, I find that more times than not, some of the best discussions I can have with students will happen in the shelter because, if for instance, the teacher is given some independent work, I can come over and sit with a couple of students while, self-guided learning. I actually was sitting, this was right before I left. I'm sitting with our TOK teacher, Theory of Knowledge. Amazing, amazing teacher, Joseph Zero. He's sitting there, and for me, it's like manna from heaven. Like it's basically philosophy combined with history, combined with how thoughts are formed and communications. It's just this broad like survey endeavor to kind of get kids up to speed on the history of thought. Can't get better than that, right? So I'm sitting there, and this is just an example. There was this 10th grader, two 10th graders were sitting next to me, and we just embarked on this conversation about Hobbes versus Locke and what's the point of government. How does society structure? And I sat there, and we were when then the next thing you know, the error alert was over. So,
Yeah. Hmm.
and that's the kind of thing you're obviously the teachers are looking for in the environment that they're creating. I'm
Absolutely.
very proud of the
Yeah.
school for that. This goes without saying, like before we opened the school and returned, you never really know how it's going to go down, right? You
Yeah.
never know until you get the doors open and you start facing, the reality of it all, what kind of beauty is inherent as well, right? In the students and the community you're building. And I want to be clear, this is teachers, it's parents, it's students, and it's board members. This is my
Yeah.
seventh school, and this is one of the most amazing boards I've ever worked with.
Hmm.
Many of them, all of them actually, were so dedicated to making this happen, and they're invested at a level. So it's a full spectrum community approach to community and what we're trying to do, and it helps that we're all in it together.
What
Hmm.
personal qualities are you
Hmm.
seeing in your teachers, your board, your governors, and maybe especially what personal qualities are you seeing in your students?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's always start with the students. The One of the things that our greatest asset, in my opinion, is that every student to AT is in that school because they really want to be there. And I just you talk to them, and it's indelibly linked to everything I feel when students are hanging out in the hallway or they're in a classroom. It underlies it all. And because they want to be there, they all have a personal commitment to being, I think, being the best they can be in that environment because they feel fortunate. And I guess that's what I really want to say. I think our
Mhm.
students, they are they have the requisite experience so far in this conflict that they know how fortunate we are to have that space. And so they are doing their part. And the learning that's occurring that is student driven, student centered, they're doing their part. So I'll just put it there, and I think it's just a testament to them as young learners. The
Yeah.
teachers, the two things about them as a group, there's three things. I'll start with the fact that they care about each other,
Yeah.
and they take care of each other, and they're
Mhm.
honest with each other. The community that we've built of educators is something to behold. that they understand what is at stake too, in terms of the humanity of all this, and I think it's the profile or the disposition, the type of teachers who want to come work in that environment. They're bringing something with
Mm.
them, right? As a group, they're adaptable. That's the second piece. They're very adaptable. They
Mm.
really can move with the contingencies that are inherent. And if we had another couple hours, we could go through that, because it's every day. We have to adapt to changing circumstances that we might not understand, but we have a nice foundation. That's the third part that I want to say. The school, and this precedes my arrival. The titans of this school's history have spent years building a culture at PSI of belonging.
Yeah.
Um, I'm sure you've had this experience, but you don't have to name any of these schools that you and I may have been at. But sometimes foundational language tends to get framed, put on a wall, and gather dust.
Mm.
And it doesn't really have a living quality to it. But PSI in its DNA has a significant and authentic commitment to belonging. Our
Yeah.
motto is a place where we belong, and we use this language daily. And I think the teachers, and I would say myself and the leadership that are new to the school this year, we came for lots of reasons, obviously, but one of them is knowing that it's real. This idea of being in a place where you belong, and difference is valued. Diversity is seen as an asset to be nurtured and celebrated. And so the teachers are adaptive. They get the mission. They understand why we're there. There's a certainty of purpose. And
Yeah.
thank you for indulging me on this, because I'm getting older. Like, I'm almost 60, and so I feel like, how many more schools will I get to work at? And you learn by this point, and you're a young buck, so I don't know if you would agree with me on this, but I feel like when you found something, you value it more the older that you get, or the longer you've been in this
Yeah.
career, because you've had the
Yeah.
experience where it was the opposite in terms of maybe the
Yeah.
school, and how it was constructed in terms of the people and the community. So the teachers know that they can count on it. And
Mm.
with all the areas of improvement that I personally need to work on, and as both a human being and a leader, the teachers, I feel this in my heart. They know they're seen, they know they're cared for, and again, we're all rowing in the same direction. And
Yeah.
I'd like to think that that inspires them too.
Yeah, I think they must be very inspired, Trey, and you're very modest in what you say and very self deprecating, because you don't work in a school for long before you realize very quickly that everything that you've just described there emanates and radiates from the leader. And if the leader isn't kind of modeling that in the very fiber of his being, walking the corridors, as you say, going down into the shelter and talking to, some guy about politics, playing the guitar, not being afraid to be yourself. If that's not happening, what you describe in terms of ethos, atmosphere, climate, that gets wrecked very quickly.
So
So I
precious.
love,
Oh, so
yeah,
precious, and delicate,
yeah.
right?
And
Um,
precious and delicate is absolutely right, Trey. Yeah. And I mean, it happens here day in, day out in the tens of thousands of schools, that we all know. But you're doing it under the usual pressures, with then the added pressures of Ukraine being under terror and war. And all credit to you for making it
oh,
as normal as can be. Yeah.
I'm very humbled by what you're saying,
Yeah.
and you know, to sit here and have this wonderful conversation with you is a gift to me, because we started our time today by talking about pulling out of the day to day, tangible, concrete experience, and being able to have some reflective time. And
Yeah.
I think I should share with you that just this conversation alone, and others like it, they're such a boon to me. And I feel like, again, humbled by all of it, and to go back and be able to see kind of where I fit in the world at large. It's like, it's the greatest dream we would ever have, right? Not just as educators, but just as people, to feel right
Mhm.
where you are, to feel like you're in the
Yeah.
correct place, doing the right thing at the right time, and feeling effective when you can about all of it. It's yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? You got me thinking now about that. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah. That's very powerful, Trey. And I wonder, does that transmit to your pupils? Feeling
mhm.
effective, having an impact, and your impact is obviously felt very quickly sometimes. It's right there in front of you, and that kind of purpose and meaning, that whole spiritual side of things. How tangible is that in the corridors and in
Yeah, yeah. We have the reality that some days, a student here, a group of students there they have a conflict or an argument, or this is a school, so obviously, these are human beings, and they're
Mm,
working themselves out, and they're young people. I mean, particularly in our middle school and into our high school. Um, I I, I want to say this is kind of an anecdote. I mentioned earlier that one of the things you might see with anxiety and trauma is a heightened sense of a lack of disempowerment. Um,
mm-hmm,
and that can really lead to some other behaviors, like more aggressive, action vis-a-vis toward each other. We don't have a general problem with fights. I I've been in environments that were with at-risk students and marginalized communities and that sort of thing, where kind of that sort of thing is more common.
yeah,
We're not seeing that in our school. Not that we
yeah,
haven't had a moment here and there where people have kind of crossed the line to school. However,
mm,
there's a even in younger kids, there's a gentility when the moment comes to process, okay, the learning moment. And
mm,
I know schools are different on this front, but the positive discipline piece in that environment has been, and I've always been an advocate of that, of positive discipline. And that, every single moment is a learning moment. And the
mm-hmm,
systems that are in place to show kids, what's expected of them, and to establish, systems of accountability and mutual reliance and mutual respect, all those things that good schools try to do, it's all the more important now, right? Because if kids are coming in and they were up all night, they've been up all night and they're tired and they're coming into the school, and now they're expected to buckle down and get into a class and push themselves as learners. And we have a heightened sense of understanding of that can also lead to distress and nerves and these things. But I
mm,
say this because the times I've seen even like a seventh grader talking to another seventh grader in front of a teacher, or I've heard about these conversations from our whole school principal or a teacher, just the level of awareness after the fact that they're growing, they're growing in their knowledge of self. And that is the
mm-hmm,
biggest thing they can get, right?
mm-hmm,
Because we can't predict what the war is going to do, and we can't predict when the sirens are going to go off. And I say this weekly, either whether it's staff or students. There's so much we cannot control. There's
mm-hmm,
so much we cannot control in that environment. Therefore, I feel very strongly that we have to emphasize and really focus on the things we can control.
mm,
And those things include the type of people that gather together in the community. We can control the morals and the moral structure and the culture and the norms, the values
mm-hmm,
that we embrace and model those. See, I mean, I could continue, but these are the things that we do have control over. And if we
mm-hmm,
can do that, I think
mm-hmm.
we've gone a couple steps further down the road of garnering the tools, both as teachers and students, that we can face some of the things that we can't control.
Gosh, that's very, very powerful. Mm,
Yeah, for me, every day,
yeah.
every single day. I I got to tell you, this I feel selfish a bit, in the fact that I feel uplifted to the point where I've lost probably the nomenclature to really explain the feeling right now of what I see in the students, how beautiful they are, and the teachers. And there are some hard days. There's some hard times. I mean, like I said, if they're up all night, or it's life too, and the way they come in and they get it together, and they lean on each other. I will never forget many things that will be with me till the rest of my life. Actually, under these circumstances, under this duress, the quality of these people and the community, it's inspiring, of course, but it's tangible. It is proof. It's absolute proof to me what is possible if you have those other things that we talked about, and if we commit to having them.
I'm kind of left with a sense that everybody in your school feels seen, feels known, that the quality of being seen and being known allows them to be very frank, very open, and very honest.
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Right. It's a constant process to do that with the teachers. Again, if you put two teachers in a room, you've got two different stories, right? Like I've got in this community, I say this to families a good bit too. You've got one end of the spectrum where the siren goes off and someone's like, "Meh, no big deal," and take it all the way to the other end of the gamut. And I mean, you've seen someone's breathing changes. Their sense of security is now in question in their mind, and all of the reactions in between, right? And knowing that all of those are valid, all of those are valid reactions. Talk about personalization in real time, right? Being able to take that reality of all these different ways of dealing with the environment we're in, and going back to the teachers, you said that they feel seen. I want to believe that they do, and I want to continue with our leadership and with them, with the teachers, like holding each other accountable to doing everything possible to take care of each other in that particular respect. Being authentic, being real, looking at each other and respecting one another in that environment. Because this is going to sound grandiose, please. The first week of school, I told the students and the teachers, I said, take this moment and just really take it in, right? The doors had just opened. The kids were in the school. I said, you'll be telling your grandchildren about that. I know it sounds like a cliche. I said, but you will be telling your grandchildren about this, that this school opened and you were part of it. And it's not rhetoric, right? And so that's a big deal. I think we live with that every day. And I think there's a responsibility that comes as to why we're even there.
Do you have a sense that you're not only living through history, but you are kind of being part of history? Yeah.
Yes. That gives me chills a little bit that you said it just like that. You read my mind, because the board gets it, the families get it, the students. I feel even though they're emerging as broader, more holistic thinkers, get it. And this is where I think we're located in the shall I say, the value we bring to this endeavor and the value we bring to this moment in history. And it is this. I know in my heart that peace is going to come. It will come. And when it comes, these students are going to grow into the next generation of leaders, many of them Ukrainian. And here's where the rubber, proverbially hits the road, right? Will this generation of leaders, will they predicate their action on hatred, anger, vengeance? Or will it be on love, empathy, global mindset, and comity, and forgiveness? That's really where we sit on the nexus of impact. And I remind myself that if we have a good day, if we've made some progress in a particular area of the school or with a particular student, we're doing that job, we're doing that work. Because the work is not for today. And this is to kind of get back to your point. There is a true, I know for a fact, teachers, they have a real solemn understanding that the work is not of today alone, right? And we all agree, I think, that Ukraine is at this moment a tipping point in history, right? The aggressors in this conflict appear to be attempting to rewrite the world order and return us to something akin to pre-World War II, where might makes right. Or will we be able to salvage and save what was hard won in World War II, which is a world order based on norms and international values? And the school in Ukraine particularly is at the forefront of that battle. And humbly, I say that we're here as kind of a locus point of the values.
Mm-hmm.
And if we
Mm-hmm.
can create that next generation of leaders, I will be a very, very satisfied and happy person in my elder years.
But Trey, then it makes me wonder, and as you know, I'm here in Northern Ireland. You know, we've our own history
Yes.
of violence and sectarian violence. I'm just wondering then, among your students, have any of them been directly affected? Have they had family who've been put out of their homes, injured, killed? If that's the case, how do you, first of all, prevent them from being resentful and maybe taking sides? And how do you try to instill some of that neutrality and that love and that bigger picture in them?
Can I can I take license and kind of flip it back toward you for a moment? I really,
Mm-hmm.
really want to hear for a moment your take on the reconciliation ideal of a conflict as horrific as the Troubles were, and
Mm-hmm.
it not as if it's all been, history does not disappear. It's just how it evolves later. What do you think were some of the keys where it's been successful for your country? How does a society, in your mind, because you're an educator, and I would love to hear your point of view on that. How does it move
Mm.
toward that?
Well, I think we do our best in classrooms. You know, we model neutrality. We're careful how we teach things like history. We're very careful with how children behave. We're very quick to be on children if they are sectarian, if there are any
Hmm.
comments. We've an issue here with emblems and flags and clothing, and we're very on to that. Certain areas can be really a tinderbox. We also, I suppose, as a bigger picture, we have integrated schooling in Northern Ireland now, and we also have shared education where different sectors will come together in the hope that there's empathy, there's understanding, and that there's tolerance and acceptance of each other.
Hmm.
And I think since the Good Friday Agreement, which really began kind of this new era, if you like, in Northern Ireland, you know, we have been largely successful. There are little pockets of issues from time to time, but they're nowhere near as bad as they were pre-98. So I
Yeah.
think in principle, that's what we do, and that's how we manage that kind of neutrality and acceptance and tolerance in education.
Hmm. Yeah. Wow. There's a part of me that feels like, and again, this might be forward of me, but what you just described, there's so much to take away from just that short litany that you shared,
Mm,
that I think are applicable in the future moving forward in Ukraine.
mm,
There's no perfect analogy, obviously. This country, Ukraine. I mean, it's funny enough. I used to teach Ukrainian history in my career as part of my European teaching,
yeah.
history teaching, and just ironically, I was always drawn toward Ukraine. Like many nations that have such amazing histories and fascinating and complicated. Ukraine as an ideal has gone through this evolution, and language was such an important
Mm.
part of it. And the
Gosh, language
layer
is very important here.
exactly,
Language is, oh
exactly.
my goodness.
Oh man, you're not
Yeah,
kidding. If I could, to talk about what language means at our school, it's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge.
yeah, yeah,
Russian was spoken just 30 years ago. I mean, to think about
yeah.
it, in Ukraine, if you wanted to get a good job, or if you were considered part of, please forgive me, but the elite, I mean, Russian was you had to have it. And in short
Mm,
order, since the beginning, it's starting in 2014 with the first invasion, but the full invasion here, it's exacerbated this issue of just the speaking of Russian itself has transmogrified,
mm,
from a cultural aspect of Ukraine and its society and its history into a
mhm,
flashpoint among certain, as you said, pockets, certain aspects of the society. It's become an arguing, it's become a foundation for a greater argument that's being had about what does it mean to be Ukrainian. And I say all
mhm,
this humbly as a newcomer to the country. I really do. I'm a very humble student of the history of the country. I'm learning things every day, and I listen as much as I can to learn. But I just feel strongly that back to this idea of peace, this idea of future. The language Russian right now, not just in our school, but in schools in Ukraine itself, it's an arguing point because for some, it's the language of the aggressor. For others,
Hmm.
one might be a proud Ukrainian and their family's from Ukraine, but they speak mostly Russian in the house. What happens now overnight? What happens overnight with that situation? And all of us as human beings, and Ukrainians in particular, are struggling how best to face this problem. When you have a war that is genocidal in nature, where one country is trying to literally wipe out the culture of another, these things like language, they rise to a different level, and they start to
Mm.
personify things for people. That, going back to our classroom, and I really took note of how you were talking about modeling and how
Mm.
one keeps an eye on the indications of sectarianism. Our situation
Mhm.
right now, since the war continues, I like to think, years from now, as perspective starts to come back into play, and when peace comes, there'll be space. There'll be space again for a more, I guess, reasonable discussion about language and heritage and all the different things that makes a country, really special.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
it's a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. It is something that I don't have the answers for. Every day, I
Mhm.
actually go into that building and wonder, how do we address this issue of language, particularly in our classrooms, and
Mhm.
in the hallways when it's spoken. But maybe for
Mhm.
another show, if I can get your advice on it.
Yeah, well, it'll not be my advice, yeah. But interesting, I should say two good friends of the show, Alistair Hamill, who's been on the show himself, and Professor Tony Gallagher, who's just retired from Queen's University. They both, I think, have travelled to different parts of the world and brought the model of how Northern Ireland is managing its troubles.
Could I humbly ask you to share some of that with me when we're offline? Some of that work?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Yes, definitely will. Yes, definitely will, Trey. Yeah. Hmm.
That's wonderful.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Bet UK is empowering the everyday wins, cheeky grins, big conversations, budding aspirations. Our goal? To make EdTech accessible and teaching exceptional. Join the global education community on the 24th to the 26th of January 2024 as we make education better together. Ticket off your Christmas list today. Get your free ticket before the 13th of December deadline. Visit www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The Guardian features comment on a parliamentary report which is calling for an overhaul of secondary education in England. The House of Lords report says the education system for 11 to 16-year-olds is too focused on academic learning and written exams. The report also calls for the English Baccalaureate, or EBAC, introduced by Michael Gove during his tenure as Education Secretary, to be scrapped as a school performance measure. The government ambition for 90% of Year 10 pupils to be entered for EBAC subjects by 2025 is criticised for being too limiting and not allowing pupils to study a range of subjects. Criticism is also levelled at the overburdened curriculum as a result of content and the 25 to 30 hours of examinations at the end of Year 11. The report echoes some concerns expressed by some teachers and school leaders. Recommendations include allowing schools to offer a more varied range of learning experiences, more opportunities to study creative, vocational and technical subjects, and that pupils should have the option to take functional literacy and numeracy qualifications that are equal in value to GCSEs in English and Maths. Former Education Minister under the Conservatives, Joe Johnson, says the evidence received was compelling and that change was urgently needed. Former Education Secretary Kenneth Baker said dropping the EBAC would give schools greater freedom. Unions welcomed the calls but said school funding, recruitment and retention and cutting workload were essential to making any changes a possibility. A Department for Education spokesperson said, "We are constantly seeing the success of our reforms," citing recently released PISA rankings and being named best in the West for primary reading out of a comparable 43 countries. The Observer focuses on Scottish schools' drop in the PISA ratings and featured an opinion piece by Sonia Soda. The piece lays blame squarely on the curriculum reform which began under the SNP in 2010. It changed the focus from knowledge, emphasising the development of transferable skills. The approach is linked to the idea of preparing children with skills they need for jobs that don't exist yet. But the article says this is a theory based on zero evidence. The article goes on to make links to other countries which made similar changes and saw similar declines, including Sweden and France. It also focuses on the impact such a curriculum has on disadvantaged pupils, increasing, it says, the gap between the non-disadvantaged peers. As the House of Lords report levels criticism at a so-called traditional system in England, it seems that Scotland's more progressive approach is being seen in a similarly negative light. The BBC World Service features a piece on universities in Hong Kong. Once attracting talent from around the world, now academics fear Beijing is restricting academic freedom. In 2021 to 22, more than 360 scholars left 8 public universities. The turnover rate, 7.4%, is at its highest since 1997, when Hong Kong returned to Chinese rule. Foreign student enrolments have dropped by 13% since 2019. Security guards are now a common sight in universities, ensuring that students and visitors must identify themselves. At the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the democracy wall has been stripped bare and a statue of the goddess of democracy is gone. The 2020 National Security Law targets subversive behaviour and has seen libraries emptied of books of bad ideologies and a ban on protests. Job applications for professors have dried up and fewer students are enrolling for PhDs in humanities and social sciences. Some academics say that even being an expert on China is a risk these days. Further details on this story can be found on the BBC News website. Pupils in Liverpool got a Shakespeare masterclass from Ralph Fiennes, which they described as weird but outstanding. The Harry Potter actor is starring in Macbeth at Liverpool's The Depot, but was supporting the Friends with Shakespeare event in a local school. The workshop included warm-up games, group work and language analysis. The star also focused on the theme of ambition in Macbeth and linked it to future plans and careers for students. Finally, GCHQ has released its annual brain teaser for UK school children. Its code-breaking challenge is aimed at 11 to 18-year-olds. More than 1,000 secondary schools signed up for this year's event, according to the BBC Breakfast programme. It is the 3rd edition of the challenge, and it is designed to test code-breaking, maths and analysis skills, with each test designed to be harder than the last. There are 7 tasks in total, and children are encouraged to tackle them in teams, as solving puzzles needs a mix of minds. The full challenge can be found on the GCHQ website, just in case you want to test your own skills. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading. Bet UK is empowering the everyday wins, cheeky grins, big conversations, budding aspirations. Our goal? To make EdTech accessible and teaching exceptional. Join the global education community on the 24th to the 26th of January 2024 as we make education better together. Ticket off your Christmas list today. Get your free ticket before the 13th of December deadline. Visit www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
I think we're probably coming. I might have a couple more minutes with you before I have to jump off. But is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you're passionate about?
Trey, it's so absorbing, and I too could go on and on and on. Oh, before I ask you a last question, I just want listeners to note. So, Trey, did you say you were coming up on 60?
I'm gonna be. I probably should retract that. I'm gonna be 57. So.
Okay, well, the important part of what you said was that I'm much younger than you. That's the important point that listeners, and on the radio, listeners should know that on the radio, I am 27.
However,
I
love it.
A strange thing happens. It's just a strange thing happens when they see me in real life. I kind of tend to look a little bit older, but
you sound just ebullient with youthful zest and energy, my friend. You got it. What's your secret?
Some chance. Yeah, I think I've got, what is it, 4? Got 4 or 5 years on you on the wrong side.
Oh my gosh.
Oh dear. Trey, coming towards the end of the show, we always ask a kind of a question that's traditional. So look, if you had a magic wand and you had only one spell to cast, what change would you make to education that would significantly improve the lot of teachers?
Good one. I got to tell you, for me, the good news is I don't think it requires a magic wand. That's the good news.
Good answer.
I think it just, what I'm about to share, I think it just requires courage and commitment and just like solidity and purpose to make it happen. But if I could do something for schools, it would make space for teachers to authentically know their kids. Because if they know their students, if they know their kids as human beings, it's got a moral imperative there, but I really want to keep it in the practical realm of what our goals are, right? Like if learning is at its most effective when kids feel safe, and if they feel safe, they can take risks, and if they can take risks, then we know where that goes. And by risks, I mean healthy risks. And teachers become much more effective in personalization, all those things. But those genuine relationships, we talk about them as if they just kind of happen. But I find in some schools and in some parts of the world where I've been, that's just not a priority. It's almost like if a teacher is focused on 10 other things, which are also important, don't get me wrong, whether it's standardized testing or whether it's reports and all these things, which again are important. How do we keep track of our students' performance and their needs? But man, just time to grab a guitar and play with a kid, find out who they are as human beings. So that would be my magic wand moment, my friend.
That's absolutely fascinating. That's a show, if not 2 or 3 shows in itself, Trey.
Totally.
So, Trey, I have to ask you, you're also a drummer. I heard that on the grapevine too.
Where are you getting all of this?
Contacts. You know how it is. Yeah.
I got it. Yes, I love to drum. I do that. Yes. Better than guitar.
Yeah. Okay.
More experience, but drumming is it's kind of a yoga combined with like meditation.
Yes.
And it's exercise. I tend to play in rock bands, so it's where I tend to perspire most and get the bad stuff out. So, yeah, I love to drum. It's kind of one of the constant things for me.
Yeah, you're going to know these 4 or 5 guys I'm going to give you, right? Give me your 1, 2, 3, okay? So in no order: Cozy Powell,
Mhm.
Chester Baker,
Mhm.
Keith Moon, Neil Peart, Phil Collins, or you could name anybody else.
Stop there. Okay. Keith Moon, Neil Peart was my hero. My first drumming hero was John Bonham from Led Zeppelin.
Now I forgot to put him in the list. Yeah.
Yep. And then I put Neil Peart and Keith Moon. Those are actually my three, notwithstanding some other drummers over the years that I've fallen in love with, like Matt Cameron from Soundgarden. But these are guys that I steal ideas from, which is the highest form of flattery, But those are
that you learn from.
I learn from those guys. Those are my faves for sure.
Thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your charisma and your commitment. In fact, nowadays, we learned this week, we don't call it charisma, we call it riz. I think that was the word of the year.
I saw that word.
Did you see that? Yeah,
I did, and I'm so not plugged in. I'm sitting outside riz. Is that kind of a word for an insult? Like, hey, stop rizzing me or something? Wow, but
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, you, sir, you have bountiful amounts of riz yourself, so that's.
I don't know about that.
Cornering the market there, but thank you so much, my friend. I hope we get to do this again sometime, and maybe a year from now we can catch back up. I can give you an update on what's happening, and you can tell me how you're doing.
Thank you very much. Stay safe. Give our best to everybody back in Ukraine.
It means a lot to have been with you. Thank you for everything.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.